Good morning, everyone. I think all of us were collectively horrified at Nick's slide last week. So that prompted me to offer this talk on shared space, which I hope will illustrate what I think the right approach should be, but also why this hasn't been adopted and what we might do about getting it adopted. There are all sorts of different names, but they all sort of refer to the same thing. And the critical thing is, if it's the public realm, use the word clearly, then the public should rule in it. And I prefer shared space rather than home zones, because home zones suggest there can be little ghettos of safety for human beings, whereas the rest of the world is dominated by vehicles. Shared space is the approach you should adopt everywhere, except on seriously mainline roads like motorways and such like. And streets rather than roads. Streets are for humans, roads are for vehicles. And fundamentally, in every aspect of whatever we do, it doesn't just apply to laying out the urban environment, but people always before things or abstractions. And lastly, given the very scarce resource, they're not making any more, a real proper allocation of land and resources, and not just using it willy-nilly if that produces the best short-term profit. We saw Nick's scheme. Here is one just as bad in a different way. Although this is relatively recent, it's probably 15 or 18 years old. It was land sold by City Council to a housing association who appointed an architect who designed it and then took it through the planning system. The dead space lying around that's just thoughtless. There's loads of slope in it and all the rest of it. And then look at number 1 and 2, which we'll look at in a little bit more detail. Look at the amount of roadway built for 8 houses. And if we move on, here's another one. And it's not only just the useless road that they develop in these things, it's just the leftover space all the time, which has no social role or purpose. It's outlined in green. It's just useless space that is a cost to maintain, or it's hard standing and so on. And then the truth is, when you provide the road, they bloody ignore it anyway. Look at this, it's a 2-lane road into a dead-end cul-de-sac. You can see all the houses facing onto it. And they still provide a big parking lane on the side. So it's a 3-lane entry, and yet the vehicle driver, 2 of them, can't be asked to use the proper parking space or park in their driveway, just parks on the pavement. Because actually, the world is designed for vehicle drivers. Look how big this is for 7 houses. And the purpose of this, of course, is to allow dustbin lorries to drive in, turn round, and come out nose first. And that's the result. And look at that kid running across. Imagine if that had been just a little stub and nothing more, and the space in front had been a grass or private gardens, or even you could have done a much denser scheme with a bit more vitality and social housing. This is just a detour to Amsterdam. This is mid-50s. This is how things were when the roads dominate, and there's nowhere for kids, although you see there are plenty of kids around. And then this is what was done. And the answer was to get rid of as much road as possible, and then to produce some very simple solutions to children. This is that great man, Van Eyck. That's the book it comes from. I highly recommend it. Not only that, it's a salutary reminder we don't need expensive gear for children. They just need things to climb on or things to lean on. Here, it's just railings to swing on or lean on and chat and so on. Some spare. And the only thing I criticize is it just, even here, it's just, and kids lean on it, as the benches are not L-shaped. Benches in a line are always antisocial. In 1971, 80% of 7 or 8-year-olds walked to primary school on their own or cycled. By 1990, it had fallen to 9%. That's, it's in a very short period of time. And we know why, because parents are scared their kids will get killed, and therefore they drive to school, increasing the problem, so even more, and so on. So the public realm is space we share with a lot of other people and other functions. The thing is that traffic is just one of these functions, and it shouldn't be the sole determinant as it is at the moment. And why doesn't it work? It's because where traffic is concerned, that the traffic behaviour has no social control and it's antisocial. So we try and organise it because it is antisocial, and all these things are put in place, including repression. And so there seems to be more, they make the solution simple from their point of view. They do more of that, more measures, more difficult exams, more police, more punishment, more technical surveillance, and more traffic space, more space. And yet nothing happens. And if we look at the way vehicles and traffic behaves in its space as against how people behave in their space and social behavior, then you can see they're constantly at opposite ends of the spectrum. And when we look at the traffic zone, it has a single purpose, it's uniform, it's regulated, it's impersonal, it's theoretically predictable. Of course it isn't, because vehicles keep crashing into things and killing people. Whereas the social zone, of course, is multifunctional, diverse, culturally defined, personal, and entirely unpredictable. The infrastructure, the road is a fast world, it's monofunctional, it's technically rude, it's isolated, dominated by traffic. The street is a slow world and it's multifunctional. It even has a certain harmony in it. But of course, there have always been conflicts in the public realm. The solution, historically and anywhere other than roads, is social behaviour. Some elements of what a shared space scheme might look like. First of all the streets lead somewhere. There are no dead ends, no cul-de-sacs. They're there to help people get to where they want to be and to access either the properties they want to go to or pass through them to go somewhere else. One single surface of the same material, no pavements, just one surface, one material, and that's used by pedestrians, vehicles, and cyclists, motorcyclists, lorry drivers, the lot. Should be minimum width where it's 2 lanes, just enough to do vehicles to slide by safely, but a minimum width so that they have to slow down and do it gently. Occasional single lane width to ensure they keep slowed down, and also to then add some extra greenery into the street. Right angle corners, so vehicles have to stop and look and then move on again, so no flares at junctions, no road markings of any sort, no road signs. Drivers should be unable to drive fast and should remain unsure at all times, so that they have to engage with other drivers or with pedestrians. Here's an example of a scheme from Craig Miller in East Edinburgh. This is one of 2 I'll briefly show you. This one is intentionally what I call higgle to piggle, which is not quite right. This is the primary school. This is the main road through Craig Miller, really leading to that wonderful shopping centre, Fort Kinnaird, or whatever new name they're giving it nowadays. Here's a classic scheme designed by road engineers. As you can see, as you come off the main road, you get in one roundabout, then another roundabout, then 3 roundabouts in that stretch of road. Plus, of course, parking, although it's 2-lane wide, widening the road to allow parking on the road and so on. I mean, it's just disgraceful. And you look at this and the way that the road, it actually comes through the parking, it then turns here, it goes through this little park and down here, twists and turns and so on, or again round here. This block of housing is solid, that's a mews, you drive through an archway and so on. That's the primary school. Because it's the central public building in the area, it's 3 stories high to give it some presence and importance, and of course it's a school designed to be used by people outside of school hours. This is parents and children leaving the school on the roads, just walking quite blithely wherever they want to go. This is the main road through Craig Mill, looking out onto that little park I touched on earlier, and the block of housing there. That's the view from that park down to the school. That's the same view, but much closer. You can see how the gardens apparently poke out into the road. Big mistake here, 2 mistakes. One is we didn't have trees here. We should have done, we got one there, but we should have in there and there. And secondly, a big mistake on this specific scheme is this stuff is too cheap. When you're doing this, you need good quality, very solid, clear definitions between the shared space and the semi-private or private space. This is to gladden the heart of older people at least, because we remember this, but playing football in the streets. That's what streets are really for, because the amount of vehicle movements in the course are very small indeed. And that's difficult to do in long straight streets designed to be travelled at 30 miles an hour, which all streets and residential schemes are by fiat of road engineers. This is a pleasure to see. Here's an unattractive appearance, but it's because this is where the old scheme, which you can see here, pavements, roads, white lines, crashes into our scheme, and you're left with a mix. It's interesting, this car, uncertain what to do, stopped before moving on, and this cyclist feels quite comfortable just cycling down the road. There's a block of flats. That's just the 2-lane road here. You reduce it to 1 lane, then goes back to 2 lanes as you go around the corner. You see right angled, again down to the school. This is a different scheme on the other side of the road. This is actually traditional rectilinear. It's completely straightforward, except these 2 are offset, so as to create a square here. and that's the central square and so on. This is slightly behind in build terms, but that's a line down, a view down the first street. There's a view back up it. That is a straight, that you drive through that street. It just got a chicane on it, or it goes down in one lane, and then we planted a nice big birch tree right in the middle of it. So when you look down, it actually looks like a really nice street. There's another one here, and that's the chicane you drive through. So it makes the street really leafy and attractive. And one day when I was up there showing some people around there, they'd put a water slide up in the street, just running a tap from the house and blowing it up, you know, and it was, taking up part of the street, but people would drive by it. The whole street was out enjoying it. It was a real joy to see. Of course, this is the fount of decades of experience. This is the Netherlands. This is a town square, as you can see, hardly anything, people, cyclists, vehicles, everything is entitled to use this space. I think a lack of confidence in putting the token zebra crossing here, this person completely ignoring it absolutely rightly, the people just walking and using spaces as see fit. This is the famous junction, but this is it with traffic lights and all the rest of it. This is the last one left after Hans Murderman, the only saintly engineer, road engineer anywhere in the world. He finally persuaded the council to do away with it, and this is what replaced it. The irony is that because traffic now doesn't drive up at 30 or 40 kilometers an hour, stop and wait with its engine idling and then move on and all the rest of it, the air is much cleaner. The traffic moves more quickly than it did, so it's faster, it's cleaner, there are no maintenance costs of traffic lights and there are no accidents. And of course, people negotiated by eye contact and treating each other equally. Those of you who have ever driven in the United States will know they've got something called a four-way junction, which means that when you get to it, everyone has to stop, but the first one there is the first one to go, and you just take it in turn, and everybody knows this, and they do. Just put a bench in the street, why not? And this is not entirely alien to Scotland. This is in Edinburgh, is the top of the Cowgate, and that's an old water well. I think because it's listed, it hasn't been desecrated with road traffic signs. But actually, it works very well. Nobody crashes into it, although nobody, you don't even know which way to drive around it. And actually, pedestrians use it as a protection zone because that's what it provides it. Andy will recognize this as a scheme we jointly did through here. But this is Old Flesh Market Close when it was 2 years by vehicles, one track wide. Vehicles still use it, including white vans and all the rest of it. People managed. It was social arrangements that got it working. And we live in a country, of course, where a large part of our A road system is entirely single lane with passing place and works very successfully. Another example, look at this. There are 4, this is massive, this one, you put a football pitch, 4 roundabouts here, never mind the rest of the useless bloody space, enormous roads and all the rest of it. And we reduced it to that. Took away everything, took away all the roundabouts, built libraries, nurseries, offices, entertainment. What a transformation of space. I mean, by no means perfect, but so much better. And this is just to prove that shared space is not just something for residential areas. It's Kensington High Street. I won't go into the detail, but this graph tells you everything. After removing all the pedestrian barriers, which of course pedestrian barriers are not there to protect pedestrians, they're there to allow cars to drive as fast as they want to, confident there'll be no pedestrians in their way. And then if one of them is in their way and they get knocked over, well, it's their fault because they ignored the barrier. Anyway, they took all the barriers away, and that was the pedestrian accidents in purple before and what happened afterwards. Clearly a transformation. Benefits of shared space are very clear. It uses less land, allows more greenery or more public space and or more buildings, particularly how more housing would be on these schemes would be much better. It reduces water runoff. And if you make the surface permeable, which you can do, then actually there's no water runoff. And even if there is, it reduces the land take for SUDs for alleviatory measures. It uses far less material and therefore is a good deal cheaper. And most important, the reason why we should do it, it's safer and it's far more sociable. So why do roads rather than streets persist? Now, fundamentally because the government locally and nationally has not made it mandatory. This is partly and mainly because of the power of the vehicle industries, the oil, the vehicle manufacturers, construction industries, enormously powerful lobby. Even without that, the conservatism of house builders. because they're in constant competition in a sort of way, they don't want to do something slightly different because they're uncertain whether their houses will sell as quickly as their competitors. So there's an easy answer to that, which I'll come to. And then finally is the untrammeled power of local government traffic engineers. So what should we do? Well, in designing streets, it does have advice. Shared space is the right way to do it, but it isn't policy. So we need to persuade the government to shift it from advice to policy, because then you can then insist to the planners and to the road engineers in your local authority you're dealing with, it has to be adopted. Strategically, we need to start talking about all roads and towns as streets and not as roads at all, and we should design them for people. The experience of Edinburgh with 20 miles an hour zones is very salutary. And of course, the average speed of vehicles through Edinburgh has not changed one iota. It's about 8 miles an hour, regardless of what the maximum speed is. And now Edinburgh is beginning to discuss whether the few roads that retained at 40 miles an hour should be reduced to 30. When we're designing streets, the hierarchy should always be with pedestrian first and private motor vehicles last, with cyclists coming in between. And lastly, road construction consent. It is completely, there is no appeal against it. There's no negotiation. If they don't like what you've proposed, then you don't get their approval, which is why, of course, house builders just bang in something they know will please road engineers. It has the flares, it has 2 lanes, can be driven at 30 miles an hour. It's put exactly to their specifications so that the one reasonable concern road engineers might have, the cost of maintenance if it's not properly built and constructed, but that's an easy matter to judge and agree. But the most important thing is you need to take away that complete authority they have by returning the decision on this to the planners. Planners get all sorts of advice from all sorts of people, from police, from the Environment Health House, from Historic Environment Scotland, and so on. Their job is to draw that together, integrate it in the best interest of the city they're working for and the councillors they report to. And they should be making the judgments on these matters, not traffic engineers who are not under any constraint of any sort at all. Lastly, to prove my point, this is a cycle path in the Highlands, recently constructed, but as you can see, it was designed by road engineers. You can take the road engineer out of the town, but you can't take the road engineer out of herself. So this is my final slide, and that's the message to vehicle drivers. It's not anti-vehicle. It's just saying you have to be like everyone else. You can do what you like. You just have to do it safely and thoughtfully, as we all do when we walk in the streets, in the towns, crossing roads and all the rest. There's some books I've mentioned or not mentioned which are worth consulting, and that is the end of my presentation. I hope it was worthwhile. Thank you very much.